Good evening. A little bit of a location change. My table is out of order. Sorry. I did actually 3 emotional interviews. One of them was kind of funny. It was a random guy. We work in a company of about 700 people. And this gentleman I hadn't run into before. So it was, "Hi, how are you? Hey, I have a school project. Can I ask you a couple of questions?" And I kind of conducted the interview while we were making our coffee. So I did sit down at the bar. I had him sit down at the little bar at our workplace. And I asked him the questions. Um, with the embarrassing one, he had no examples. He actually phoned a friend. He called his wife, and she had no dirt on this guy. He was clean. So it was a really great experiment. I'm going to tell you about it just because it was short and it was sweet. When I asked about the embarrassing, he shrugged. He was genuinely perplexed. He struggled to answer. He kind of laughed because he was almost embarrassed that he didn't have embarrassing situations. I followed your prompts and I tried to prompt him. I shared an embarrassing story of my own. Um, Nothing really brought anything to mind when he called his wife. The story that he came up with was not that embarrassing. It was more like fun among friends, and he admitted he didn't have anything embarrassing. And um, that kind of wrapped up that part of the conversation. There wasn't really any body language change. There wasn't really any. I think the biggest change was he went from being, "Yeah, let's have this interview," to, "Oh, I don't know." His facial expressions completely showed the same perplexed like, emotions. When I asked about life changing, he became instantly sentimental, more relaxed, more comfortable. He looked like he started daydreaming a little bit, and he said it had to be when he had kids. His wife had been disabled. He had not had children with his wife. They've been together a long time, so they actually started fostering to adopt and ended up adopting 2 siblings and went from a family of 2 to a family of 4 overnight while still fostering other kids. He said it was hard. He said that it was life changing because suddenly life wasn't about what they wanted, including them wanting kids. It was about what the kids needed and what they needed to do for the kids and what they wanted for the kids. That was 6 years ago, and he pulled out pictures from his wallet to show me pictures of his daughters when they were adopted, pictures a couple years later, and pictures now. So it was a very sweet interview. With that one, because I was supposed to be a little bit more distant, a little more businesslike, I went to making my coffee and asking him questions kind of over my shoulder, not facing the same direction as him, very curt. It had I would say, no effect on this gentleman. He was very adamant that he was still going to tell me the story, and he kind of drifted quiet and really kind of reminisced on those moments. The second interview I did, she laughed when I asked for most embarrassing. She said that was one of the hardest questions you could ask somebody off the bat. It was another person that I don't know that I work in the same building. I just kind of walked the 4 floors until I found somebody I didn't know, and which is actually kind of hard. I didn't realize I knew as many coworkers as I do. And I just said, "Hi, I'm Katie. I'm in lending. Can I ask you a couple of questions? They're not work related." And she agreed. So immediately upon embarrassing, she was already embarrassed, caught off guard. She started laughing, immediately had a story. She told me this great story. It involved long darts, no alcohol, which she said made it more embarrassing for her because she didn't have an excuse. Nailed a brand new car, was not invited back. She seemed to really have a really good sense of like humor about this, a little bit of nostalgia. I kind of laughed and was very engaged with her. Talked to her about how did it go, what did you think, how did it affect your friendship with these people, which is how I found out she was never invited back. um, it was a great time. We laughed all the way through this conversation. She had a very fun attitude about the embarrassing situation question. When I asked about life changing moments, she had the same answer when she had kids. And being that I'm trying to be serious and very business like, I said, "Okay, well, you said when you have kids, was it when you had the first one or the second one that was the life changing moment?" She said the first. It changed her priorities. It shifted her life focus. it was a very sentimental happy. We were sitting down for this one, and I switched my positions to try to make myself a little bit more cut off, a little bit more distant as a salesperson. When I read your instructions, I really understood one was trying to goad them to try to convince me why it was life changing. One was more to coax it out of them, make them comfortable giving that information. With the life changing one on this one, it didn't really seem to have an effect. So I was kind of unhappy with the first interview. I didn't feel like I got the information or the results that we were looking for. So when I had a member come in and do a signing, I realized that this was genuinely a stranger. I have no idea anything about this guy. He's not a friend. He's not a family. He's nobody. Like, he's a guy off the street, and I just did his loan, and we talked for maybe an hour, and it was very basic questions. Where do you live? Where do you work? When do you want your monthly payment? So I decided to interview him, and I did it on a Post-it. So I asked him the embarrassing question, and he told me this great story. He immediately started laughing. His face turned red. He had a ton of emotional reactions. You can almost feel the attitude in the room change. He was back there. So it was a story about him as 21 in a club. The club decided to start playing the dating game. He was chosen as bachelor number 1. He was very excited. He's shy. He had no idea what to do, and I can attest the guy is shy. You have to kind of get him to warm up a little bit. He says he asked a question and totally bombed it. He doesn't even remember what the question was, what his answer was. He bombed it. And he said the entire club busted out and laughed at him. His friends thought his failure was the best thing that ever happened to them. And he didn't remember the question. He didn't remember his answer. But as he's telling the story, he's going from this is funny to hurt. He had a lot of hurt tied into this memory. And I was sitting there being very empathetic. I was being like, oh my gosh, no way. I was leaning in. I was having that conversation with him, trying to be very engaged, very sympathetic, trying to pull the story out of the gentleman. And yeah, he said he didn't get the girl, and he was completely horrified at himself. And you could kind of see that embarrassment come back to the surface of his shyness. He was embarrassed of who he was as a person at the time. So then I asked him, I kind of let him sit on that for a moment, and I shared an embarrassing story to try to make him feel better. I have a lot of really good ones. And then I shared the most life-changing moment. I asked him about that one. And I had changed my posture while kind of easing into this position. And I wasn't prepared for what happened. His story, it brought tears. The life-changing moment was not about kids for this gentleman. It brought him tears. It brought him sadness. I guess he was part of a church in the area, and he was in the ministry. He actually made it up to a national level of leadership. He was connected, and he became disillusioned. He said that the more he saw of how things operate in the back, behind the curtain, so to speak, the more disillusioned he became. All those things that people complain about churches, the bigotry, the two-facedness, the misuse of funds, the mistreatment of people. He said he got to see it bright as day on full display, and he didn't feel like he had anybody to talk to. He didn't feel like he had anybody to relay this information to. So it took him a few years, but he made the decision to step down from leadership. He never thought it would be permanent. He didn't think that it was going to be a life-changing situation. He thought it was going to give him a chance to take a breath, and then he figured he'd go back into that line of work, and he never actually did. The backlash from stepping down was so targeted, so immense, and so strong. It still brings tears to this gentleman's eyes, and he's in his 60s. It still bothers him. He doesn't think that he would have changed anything if he had known. He said no, that once he made the decision to make that step, it was easy. But he lost his entire support network. He lost his entire, his friends, his close friends, people he had known pretty much his entire life. He lost that entire network. And as somebody who has also become disillusioned with churches and has also taken a step back from, admittedly, a much lower level of leadership, I could really relate to that. It made it hard for me to stay in that curt business-like manner. I found myself turning my body towards him despite not supposed to. And I found myself really sympathizing with him and not keeping that cold front that your instructions say to. Um, he had tears. He was on the border of crying. So it was really a really tough one to witness, especially being that he is a stranger to me, that when he started the story, he said only a few people had ever heard. So that was probably the most candid of all of the interviews, and probably the most emotional of all of them. His story with the embarrassment, that really struck home. After talking about it for a few minutes, he really seemed to think that it was very fresh in his mind. He remembered a lot of it. I think he did remember the question. I don't think he wanted to say what it was or what his answer was, because it was just that off the wall. The life-changing moment, he really teared up. He said that maybe 2 or 3 people know, and so he said that it was driven by the behind the scenes behaviors that he saw. He wouldn't change it today, but it definitely changed who he was as a person, and it changed the course of his life, because he was set up to be at a national level. Here he was a national level minister, and he stepped away, and as a result, the backlash included rumors within the church about him. It included lies, it included manipulation, it included a lot of hurtful things, and it ultimately drove him away from the church altogether and changed the course of his life and his career. So overall, the embarrassing ones I've found to be kind of fun. Everybody got a good laugh out of their embarrassing stories and seemed to have recovered pretty well from them, short of interviewee number 1, who didn't have a story at all. The life-changing moments seem to be about kids, having kids, how kids change your life, except for the interviewee number 3, who had that church interaction. And it was overall a really refreshing experience to get to know people on a more human level that I otherwise wouldn't ever talk with, have a reason to discuss with. So I think it was a successful experiment. I definitely enjoyed it. It was definitely one to get me out there, and as a salesperson, that's saying something, because I'm talking to people all the time. I'm always engaging strangers. I'm always looking for that next deal. So thanks for the assignment. I look forward to the next activity.